Welcome back to the podcast. I'm really excited about today's episode because I finally, after a long time of wanting to do this, I finally got a chance to chat with author Marcos Hernandez, who is the author of several books. One in particular, which is the one that I was mostly intrigued by, is the book called Where They Burn Books, They Also Burn People, which tells the story historical fact actually, of a Catholic priest who burned all but four Mayan books back in 1562. It was a lot of fun. He chatted with me a little bit about his background, his hobbies, his education, how it is that he decided to become an author, and why he is writing these types of books now. So I can't wait for you all to hear all about him. You are my victim today for this.
I'm honored.
But you know what? So, okay, well, first of all, welcome. Thank you
Thank you.
so much for accepting the invite. I don't even know how I came across your account. It must have been maybe like a reel or something.
Sure.
And it caught my attention because you were promoting your book, and I was like, huh, that's interesting. So I had been wanting to like talk with you for a really long time, and then I wasn't really reaching out. I don't know why, but I want to believe that this is probably the right time.
That's what I was going to say. It's just, it wasn't the right time yet. So
Yeah.
it worked out.
Yeah, so I purchased your book.
Okay.
Because I know you have a couple, but
Which
I
one
purchased.
did you get, though? Where They Burn
I
Books, They Also Burn
purchased-
People?
Yes, that one. And from what I can tell, and I'm gonna I would like for you to get into that a little bit later in the conversation. But from what I
Yep.
can tell, it's like two different stories
Yes.
that are kind of switching back and forth from past and present. Is that
Present-ish.
Sort-
Present-ish. It's
Present-ish,
like,
okay.
yeah, it's like late 20, like, let's say 2010 New York City-esque.
before we get into like your work and how you got inspired or what gave you the motivation, the idea to write something like this, I would like for you to maybe tell us a little bit about yourself so that listeners kind of get an idea of what makes you who you are.
Kind of the biggest thing is just like the breadth of things I'm interested in. Even now, I am a national level weightlifter. I'm starting jujitsu at like a kind of like a hyper competitive school at 36 too. I'm like kind of old for starting jujitsu.
You do not look 36, by the way.
Thank you.
I thought you were like in your late 20s.
Yeah. Well, it's like once I list everything out that I've done, then they'll be like, you couldn't have fit all this in 20s. But so it's like, the kind of the breadth of the experience is kind of where is what makes me tick, I would say, because I'm extremely interested in athletic pursuits. Like I was mentioning earlier, I stream on Twitch and I still play video games, but to me it's very much like fine tuning and fine muscle control on your hands. Then there's also, I have a degree in chemical engineering and physics, so I'm very math oriented. I was a food scientist for a gelato manufacturing company, and so that was fascinating because
That sounds very interesting.
it was very interesting. I worked at Starbucks for 9 years.
Somebody who pursues that or has like works in that area, what is your job? Like what would you do there?
Which area? The food
for,
scientist?
Yes.
That was okay. So think of it like you're a restaurant that wants a boutique flavor. So if you want a watermelon flavor, but you want it to be sugar-free, no one would want this, but I'll just say for the sake of the argument, like you want a watermelon flavor, sugar-free, made with a coconut milk base that also could work as a sorbet. Okay. So most people don't realize that flavorings, it's like perfumes. They're the same kind of chemistry, but flavors have on the order of, let's say 5 to 20 compounds. Perfumes have on the order of 50 to 100, just rough magnitudes. So we get, let's say there's 4 or 5 main flavor houses. Each flavor house has multiple watermelons. There's ripe watermelon, green watermelon, juicy watermelon, like all these watermelons. So let's say you get 20 different watermelon flavors. We have to go through, smell them, taste them, taste them with sugar, taste them with citric acid. Then you have to make them. How do they taste with milk? How do they taste without milk? And then you present this to the client, and it's like a very collaborative process. Like they do like it, they don't like it, or we'd fly them in. So I was in charge of that. Plus I was in charge of gelato manufacturing in Las Vegas and Baltimore. So I also had to deal with products and ordering, and we manufactured a powdered creme brulee that actually like a really pretty high-end restaurant used, and it was like sacrilegious, but they still did it for the sake of expediting everything. I had a mango smoothie that I personally made for Sheetz. I used to have to go up to Pennsylvania to the Sheetz R&D facility, and I made that because of my background at Starbucks. I worked with Barnes and Noble and made something for their cafe, things like that.
That sounds really fun. That sounds like something that I would enjoy.
It was very fun, and then I quit so I could be a full-time CrossFit coach. And so then I did that until pandemic. And then it was while I was a CrossFit coach that I started writing. And then I wrote, I think, like 8 science fiction books, and then cultural heritage is now the thing.
Yeah, you're right. You could not have fit all that.
It's a lot.
In just 20.
Because I've been going, and so it's just like it just accumulated.
So then, would it be fair to say that you're just somebody who like maybe gets introduced to something, gets a taste of something new, sort of falls in love with it, and then just pursues it and goes all in?
Yes, I become a slave to my hobbies, is what I say.
That's
like I am.
You know what? I think you and I have that in common because I do that as well. Like when somebody asks me, like, tell me what you're like, what are your like passions or hobbies? It's really hard for me to just. I admire people who can just in like 2 sentences tell you.
Right.
I can't do that because there's so many things that I love, so many things that like interest me, so many things that I still have yet to like figure out, and like I don't know.
Oh, I agree.
So yeah. So it sounds like we have that in common.
Yeah, so just been busy. I've just been busy, and so that's kind of where the writing came about because I wanted a way to make money when I was sleeping. And so you just need to have something you can sell. And I was like, well, what's a digital? And I read a lot. I've always read a ton. So writing science fiction was a very easy transition. Now, if I was smart, I would go, or if I could go back in time, I'd be like, Marcos, read romance and then learn to write romance. Because they read a book a day, and it's just
they devour it.
I know, and so
devour it.
Yes, it is a very different ball. Your numbers are just completely different. So if it was pure money play, I would have definitely gone like the romance route. But
yeah, and that's why I think also like romance authors are just popping them out. Like, but you didn't do romance because obviously I'm assuming your thing is science fiction and like you said now, cultural heritage. How did you even decide to write something like this? Like, where did you get the idea? Yeah.
Like, do you want all of it from the beginnings of the book, or do you just want the actual?
I want all of it. I want the process. I want how you got here.
Yes. So, remember, chemical engineering and physics is like my education.
Right.
I was not wired to write. It was very much a learning process, but I treated it very much like I do my athletic stuff. So you just show up every day. And I made a rule for myself. Like I set a 10-minute timer. I used a ballpoint pen on one of those green military notebooks. You just have to keep your pen moving the whole time, no matter what happens. And so there's days that be like, I don't know what to write. This is nothing. This is stupid. But it just has to keep moving, and you cannot stop for 10 minutes. I did that from April until August, 3 to 5 times a week. I'm not an everyday cabinet guy. I'm like 4 times a week for most time. But then in August...
But you do set time apart for it, though.
Oh, yes. I'm good about setting time apart, but it's just like every day is too much. I don't feel like it today. August, I had the beginnings of a story and then it was the first time that the next day I had something I could build off of. Everything else kind of just like fizzled out. Whereas like in August, I finally had something that's like, oh, I have a point and I can start tomorrow. And then that turned into my first book. But like I didn't even publish it for another year and a half because I still had to get an editor because I knew I wasn't going back to school for this. I hate school with a fiery passion that consumes my soul. So
So do I. I hate the classroom setting. I love learning, but I hate if I have to go sit and it's like,
oh yeah,
do this. I can't.
I get very distracted by other people because I'm like I want to talk to my friends or I want to talk to girls or
Right.
and then also I have like an authority problem with the teacher, and so it's just like it's just not for me, and so I know this. I just know this. So I took that the first novel and I hired what's called a developmental editor. So there's kind of tiers of editing. This is kind of your full Monty. Everything's getting broken down. So I did that, and that was really, really hard. Getting feedback on something like that, it's almost like getting an entire semester's worth of grades at once, and it's just like a huge dagger. But now I'm kind of like, this is my job, it's fine.
Yeah.
But the first time it was like, oh my gosh. So then I kind of fixed it, went through all that, and then put it out, got some good reviews, whatever, and then kind of kept moving. Wrote the second one, which is like one of my favorite worlds. Technically they're all related. Like I did some convoluted stuff to make it so that they are, but like this one series, it's almost like a Blade Runner type world. So that's the second book, and that was almost like a Fistful of Dollars. Are you familiar with that? It's like an old Western. Yojimbo. No. It's pretty much like the guy goes into town. There's two warring gangs. He plays them off each other and ends up saving. It's just a very Clint Eastwood Western type of like.
Okay.
Yeah, but this is in a dystopian future Blade Runner setting. And then the third book is the one that kind of changed everything, because that book is about my father's journey from El Salvador to the United States. And so that I sat down with him and I talked to him, and I heard like the first time I'd ever heard the entire story about all of it.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was really interesting. So I'm mixed. So my mom's American. I grew up with my maternal grandmother. Well, my parents are still together. I still see it, but like I spent time with my mom and my maternal grandmother while my dad was working. And so I don't speak Spanish. I can get by, but again, it's not like fluent or anything like that. But hearing all this, I was like, oh, this person's your cousin. This person is this. This person is that. I heard about girls he met and they broke his heart and he broke their heart, and it's just like I heard all of it. So I took that, and then that's called Education of a Wetback. So he chose the name. I let him choose the name. He wanted to make it called 3 Times a Wetback because there's a Tigres del Norte song called Tres Veces Mojado. And so that's what he wanted, 3 times a wetback, and he crossed the border 3 times. And so it's like that's his song. But I was like, so I changed it to Education of a Wetback, but still roughly what he wanted. I've definitely got like some flack for that decision to call it the book title, but I'm just kind of like, it's his story and he said that's what he wanted.
Yeah, and if he's comfortable with it. And you know what? Like, actually, there are a lot of, because I know it's like politically incorrect to be calling people that, right? But like, I'm Mexican, and if somebody outside of the Latino world, especially somebody that has no understanding of like migrating and how that works or whatever, if somebody was to call me that, I'd be hugely offended and really pissed off. But right. It makes sense having it be your dad's story, and yes. A lot of people can probably relate to that. So
right,
yeah,
and he and I've gotten there's some Mexican people on social media that almost reserve that name
for themselves.
Yes, and and so I've also gotten like some heat for that because I'm not Mexican. But the kind of the point is that, and this is what my dad says, he's like, they all think we're the same anyways. He's like, so it's like almost like this tongue-in-cheek thing that like, yeah, they all think I'm a Mexican, like, so we're all like, he's like, to white people, we're all wetbacks. And so this is where it's just almost like this kind of like, oh man, it's, and again, I'm not. Sometimes I feel a little bit of a certain way just because I am mixed. So I'm just kind of like, I'm not going to argue. I'm just like, look, if you feel this way, I apologize. It was not meant to do harm whatsoever. It was literally just hearing my dad's story and then telling this story kind of to the world. So there's a really cool little subsection about this. Like my favorite little like mini story within the story is he crossed the border and he hid in the back in the not hid the what does he call him, pollero, put him in the trunk. So he crossed in a van and then he had to get in the trunk of a sports car right when he crossed the border, and then they're driving and they got pulled over, and then he got kind of pulled over and he hears all these people around him running, and then they finally open the trunk and it's just him and the main guy that was transporting them. And then my dad just kind of looked around and he said he started laughing. And he's like, and I was like, hold on, dead ass. And I'm like, he swears he was laughing. I was like, okay. And I was like, what's so funny? He's like, all this, like, who cares? And then, but then they were like, what are you doing here? And he was like, I don't even know where I am. He's like, I went into this trunk to take a nap and fall asleep, and now I'm here. What's going on, guys? So like that was like his thing. He was like, he got caught by Border Patrol, and they took him back to Tijuana, but like he just in the back of a red sports car, and he just said that he'd just fallen asleep there. And I was like, you're crazy, dude. Like, I don't have a traveling, but like my brother was a digital nomad for 3 years. He's been traveling the world since coronavirus. I can see where he get it. Like, him and my dad, very similar. Me, I don't travel at all. So I'm like, bro, the fact that you just were like, yeah, sure, whatever. Like, that's crazy to me. Like, I would have been so scared. I would have been like, I just want to go home. Where's my mom? Where's my dad? I don't need to do this. Like, I don't need any of this. I don't like, and so I was like, y'all are just built different.
It's definitely different. Like when you really, really sit and literally put yourself in their shoes and think they just left without a plan, without knowledge of the language, traditions, like customs here, not even knowing where they were going to end up, and
Nothing.
left everything that's familiar to them.
They just
everything
heard there's
they cared
money.
for. Yeah, and that's it. It's like that takes a lot of balls.
It wouldn't have been me. Like I do not have the personality for it at all. I'm just like, I know I don't, and so I'm just like, okay, like just with a backpack and not. It's like I just like imagine walking into like Russia, and I'm just like
here I am.
What would I do? Yeah, like
I'm gonna start a brand new life.
Yes, ready. Like it's so mind-boggling to me.
I know. It
so,
really is. And I'm assuming
yeah.
because you said earlier that, like, in the conversation, you were kind of like a mathematical, like, your brain's more math. So that probably has a lot to do with it. You have to have the logistics down. You have to have a plan.
Oh.
So this would be, like, your worst nightmare.
Okay, this is like Amazing Race. It sounds like it's like stressful, and I know that I'm like safe. This is crazy. I'm just like beyond belief. But yeah, so then at the end of that book is kind of like the character meets a woman, and then at the very end you find out that it's like we should have a kid and we should name him Marcos, and so find out it's like my dad. Like that's sorry world, that's the spoiler. Like,
it's me.
Yeah, so like it's my dad. So yeah, so then I wrote a trilogy, a science fiction, like a metaphysical science fiction trilogy that I really like. It doesn't sell as much as other books, but it's almost like this kind of like it's like mind upload type stuff. Let's put it this way. The first two books, I ended up with the same twist at the end as Westworld, but like I'd finished my book 6 months before, and I was like, this one book's just like languishing in Amazon. The other one's Westworld. I was like, this is wild. And so that's a little bit annoying, but it's just like, what are you going to do,
It is what it is.
Exactly.
So do you feel like this is going to be kind of like where you're going to stay forever, like as a
writing?
writer, just putting out books? I mean, I know that you have like several interests and stuff, but like,
yes.
Do you think that this is something you plan to do for the rest of your life, essentially?
Yes. One fact before I go into this, and then it'll make sense when I'm done. Mm-hmm. I wrote a book about the Maya. I'll talk about that when we go through the rest of my books. I wrote one about the Inca. historical fiction about Maya, historical fiction about Inca, and I just finished historical fiction about kind of all of Mexico. It includes Aztec, it includes Our Lady of Guadalupe, and it includes Katrina Calavera, which is like the Day of the Dead lady. This most recent book, I'm rewriting it right now. This thing damn near killed me. Like it's the only time I don't know. It's like I wrote 2 paragraphs a day for months on end, and I ended up with 360 pages of a book. Just all of it, all like in totality, the work, the subject matter, the emotional investment. Like this is the first time I've felt like, oh, everyone thinks that writing a book is so hard. I get it. Like
I can see why.
I can see. Yes, this is the first time I was like, it was terrible to write. But on the flip side, it's also the thing I'm most proud of. Like this is like the thing that like I'm like, if I die tomorrow, I'm like, at least I got that book out of me. You know, this is the thing I did. As of this instant, I'm never writing another book again. But this is also because I'm just like, I'm just a little bit burned out, a little bit over it. You know, probably I wouldn't be surprised if by like Thanksgiving, I'm like, because I already know what the next book will be. So it's just like in my head, it's like back
just
here.
Just putting it on paper now.
Yes, yeah. The next one is going to be about like quantum entanglement and the many universe interpretation, and how if you can sense like okay, let's put it this way, there's a version of you that is like one decision away, you're very close, so you can sense them. If there are 2 decisions, it's a little further, 3 decisions, right? And then the point of that story is going to be that those entanglements are where emotions come from, and so like that inner turbulence is like the decision and how much different your life would be based on that decision, and whether or not you, and like the number of discrete decisions affects it, and the difference in actual emotional state within the 2 different universes affects your emotional. Anyways, but it's like this weird kind of like another metaphysical kind of like science fiction.
I would love to read that. Like, first of all, let me say that you are actually kind of like your book, not you, but the book I'm reading right now. It's actually like the first one that I read of that that genre.
The way I describe it, because it is 2, right? But the one about the priest, that's like almost like the Dahmer, a Netflix show, where like you don't know exactly what they said inside the room, but you know they were in a room at this time.
Right.
So this is what I did, but for a priest in the Yucatan who ended up burning all but 4 Mayan books in 1562. So real quick, I'll backtrack a second because there is something so I wrote the science fiction trilogy, and then I wrote like an exercise book for bariatric patients before and after surgery. That's like a whole separate thing. I was going to do something with that. I'm not. So completely.
But
it's there. Anybody that needs help before a gastric bypass. Yes. But then during pandemic, my grandmother, who is indigenous Salvadoran, she passed away from COVID, and so and this is like in July. Thank you. But this is where the spark came from, because it was after she passed, and I was like, man, like I really don't know anything about like indigenous culture, indigenous like that area, and so I started researching it. And then where she lived is like right on the edge of Guatemala, like all the way up. And so it's like right where the Pipil people and the Maya people kind of intersect. But there's really nothing about the Pipil. So I was like just looking for information, searching. And then the Guatemala Maya are actually Highland Maya, and then the Yucatec Maya are Lowland Maya. And then within each, there's different tribes and different languages. But for the most part, the Lowland Maya are one of the 4 independent inventors of writing. So it was Mesopotamia, China, Egypt, and Mesoamerica, with Lowland Maya and the Yucatan. Then I was like, wow, that's fascinating. Where are all these books? That's really cool. Come to find out, there's a priest who, in 1562, he got upset because he thought that the people, the indigenous people that he was preaching to, were kind of like in his corner, I guess. They were like more Christian than he, or Catholic, I guess, specifically Catholic. He believed that they were like, they were in, they had bought into the whole thing. Well, he found, I forget if it was the children, there's a pair of children that found something in a cave. More or less, he discovered that they were still worshiping or still performing their old rituals. He went nuts. He did his own inquisition, unsanctioned. He had a whole like torture area set up to like to encourage confessions. And then it's super sad because the first person would say like, yeah, we have 3 idols, and then the next person in line that they didn't get tortured would say they had 3, but then if they got tortured they would say we had 5, and so eventually they just kept going up and up and up and up and up. So then he took Spaniards and sent them out, and Spaniard and like indigenous kind of like
their quote unquote
thugs.
Allies, or
thugs, I would say, but like I'm sure they thought they were doing the right thing,
right?
But they
were
would go
saving
out
their own skin, is what it was. What was going on?
See, but this is another thing too. It's like they're kind of So they went out and they collected everything they could find. So there's even stuff that wasn't even religious that they just brought back because they said they had 5, 15, whatever it was, idols, things. So this is, and then he burned them all in a town called Mani in July, I want to say July 11th, 1562. And so this, and literally every example of Mayan writing, except for 4, and those 4 weren't because they were like saved or anything. No, they just happened to be in caves or whatever. So one of the 4 independent inventions of writing all got wiped out, effectively wiped out, except for a few, by one priest because he got upset because
they weren't fully invested.
Because they weren't fully invested. And then the Catholic Church recalled him to Spain. He sat on trial. While he was on trial, he wrote a book. The Relación is like kind of like, it's like a cultural study. They used to call them Relaciones. He wrote it. This is where we know most of the information, actually, which is like super messed up because most of the information we know is because of this one dude who wrote this thing. But because he wrote this thing, the church let him go and then made him a bishop and sent him back. And so then the person who like did all this stuff is all of a sudden the like head honcho. And so and so I was I couldn't believe that when I found that out after like researching, and so I was like, oh my gosh, I have to write about this. And so that's where this book came from.
And I can tell because I hear like, just from without giving too much away, of course, because it, like the details and how you tell it, it's really, really pretty. But like it really captivated me, which I did. Like I said, if I'm being honest, I was like, oh, is it gonna lose me? But no, because there's that historic aspect to it. Yeah, it's amazing.
And it's like a little magical realism as well. It's like the fantastical elements.
Yeah, it's very, very well written, but like really, truly, you did a good job. It's really good how you very smoothly switch from one story to the other one. And then when I realized that, I was all, wait, these are 2 separate stories. Like, you know what I mean? It was done really well, but like it's really sad.
You'll see why at the very end.
Why you do that?
Yeah.
I know, I'm telling you, like after this I have to just like set time apart to listen for a full hour to it, because I've been trying to listen to it in between doing things and it's just not working. But so far I like it. But so you said, because like I can hear the priest that you're talking about in the book, and he really almost did have like this, I guess, in his heart and his mind, like I'm doing the right thing. I'm doing the right thing, and these indigenous people really are with us. Like he almost has that trust in them, like that the majority of them are there with them, and they believe in all this.
Well, they also trusted him too. He was like the best. He was the best at their language. That was a huge thing of it, which is and it's a very specific Yucatec Maya. There's a couple, like Quiche is another Mayan language. There's a handful / maybe even like 10 to 15. I should know this. I don't, but he was the best at Yucatec Maya, and so they actually trusted him. One of the guys who fought in the last Maya rebellion in 1545, Nachi Cocom, is the one who showed Friar Diego they're like sacred texts in the first place. Like it was because they didn't even know about that they existed
trust.
because of the trust that and that was the whole reason that he even saw them, and they were all in these like hidden places, and so he the only reason he knew where they were or their caches is because they trusted him, because he was like they're almost like their ally. Okay,
Yeah.
so the politics of that time are very weird, because
Yeah.
there's what's called like the encomienda system, where like Spaniards are in charge of a bunch of people, and then there's the priests, and then there are the settlers. And so it's like this kind of like, it was like a three-way battle for power. So, or I guess it was indigenous, encomienda, and then yeah. And so it was like the triangulation of the power is where things kind of started getting hairy.
Yeah, because like, who do I trust? Who's really for me? And I think the sad part of all of this is like, well, first of all, the audacity of like, oh, because you're not fully invested in this thing that I bring to you, right? Now I have to destroy these reading materials, these writing materials that you've written. But not all of them were even about religion. Like, these were probably, I imagine, like stories, things that you're leaving behind for generations to come. Yeah, like things that you'll need. And it's like you just
histories. But then there's like there was a ton of like masks and like all sorts of like garments, like just like everything you could think of from a culture and a civilization. He gathered it and tried to like destroy it all. And so this is where it's like it just museums worth of stuff that could have like changed everything. Yeah.
And like, I mean, I don't know, for instance, hearing you talk about how you're doing research and finding out, like, this is part of you too, right? Like,
oh yeah,
like having kept those stories, those records, those artifacts, all of that, like that just would have really amplified somebody's pride and like, these are my roots. This is where I come from. And then it comes ripped it away.
And so there's like the whole other aspect, which I've talked about in other places, pretty much like the tension between the indigenous population and then the Spanish Catholics in the first place, because there's so many there's like the birth of colorism, and then all this like just top to bottom, and I'm just like, I can't, like, and like my dad will go to mass, and I'm just like, still, huh? And he's like, yeah. I'm just like, okay, like,
yeah, I
don't know what to tell you.
I know, because once you learn all these things, it's really hard to like bring it to someone's attention and be like, this was brought to you mostly, or our ancestors, through violence and forceful and manipulation, and like, it's not something that was gifted to you and that you embraced. You know what I mean? So it's is
like
really
tricked.
Yes, you were tricked, or you were forced, or you were manipulated, or you were like, it's your life or this.
Almost, yeah.
Yeah, because like I don't know if there's a book I read called what's it called in English? I can't think of it right now, but it talks about like the beginning of how all of North America, South America, Central America, how it's been from the beginning set up in such a way to where it all pours into what is now the United States, right? And how it was all drained. It was all set up to drain from them from the beginning, and that's why they're
open
now
veins.
Yes, that one.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, there's a passage where it talks about how the Spanish crown did not think it was a good look for priests to have slaves, to make slaves of indigenous people, or just like the people, the explorers, to have slaves. And so they're like, it doesn't look good on us. Let's create. And they came up, their plan for that was, let's come up with a document where it's like an agreement. You're agreeing to accept to become, to go into Christianity. And if you don't, you die, right? Or you're persecuted. But it's like, when you think of like, a lot of these indigenous people didn't understand. They didn't know what was on the paper. And it's like, you either signed it or you didn't. And if you signed it, you didn't know what the hell you were signing. And it's enraging to me when I read those things.
Well, and so having written the one about Mexico City, it's like thinking about like Cortez walking up, saying, it's called it's pretty much the requirement, but in Spanish, like requerimiento. Cortez would say this out loud, that like, We are your rightful rulers. This land has been given to us by by God. If you do not accept our rule or God, any and all consequences are on you. And then he told this to La Malinche, who translated to Nawa, and somehow they like, and again, this is like, that's a whole nother topic of discussion because I just finished writing about this. But that's like, how does that make sense that this person, it's like, this is not a legally binding thing.
I know.
And so it's just, yeah.
Like you just came. Who made you the authority to come
yes.
up with this? It's like me showing up to your room right now and being like, "By the way, I am here because God told me, and I owned you and everything in here."
Exactly. And
That's
so this is
crazy.
Yeah, and so there's a little bit of like, I still have a little bit of. It's not that I don't like America necessarily. It's just an appreciation for the history of it, right? Like, hey guys, like, I know we have our moral high ground, but let's not forget 60 years ago, black people like became whatever.
Yeah.
150 years ago, we slaughtered all of the bison so Native Americans would starve. Like, and so this is just, sometimes I get like a little bit bothered by the moral high groundedness of a lot of people.
The standard that the country sets for everyone else.
Yes, when it's just like the only reason we don't have these problems is because we slaughtered all of it.
Yeah, you eliminated your problem.
Yes,
by
and that's another
trickery
part
and violence.
Right, and that's another part of the book I just wrote is like during the Mexican Revolution, they were talking about, it was like a thing that they were like, we should have done what the United States did with their indigenous population. We should have just slaughtered them because now they're a problem. And it's just like, and yet people still go to church, and I'm just like, okay,
yeah,
like
I
it's
know.
really hard sometimes. I'm just like, but on the flip side, it's very useful for community. Like I do appreciate like the loneliness epidemic, community building, but it's just like, can we just acknowledge,
like
just
the roots,
acknowledge.
yeah.
Like I don't even care about the rest of it. Like I've made mistakes. Y'all
Right.
can make mistakes. Like just acknowledge this. And so this is where I'm just kind of like on this kind of like campaign for acknowledgement.
Yeah. And I'm right there
so,
with you because
yeah.
I grew up Protestant, which it's a whole other thing with the evangelicals and stuff. But I grew up Protestant, and as I've been learning and unlearning so many things, it's a lot of deconstruction happening, and there are a lot of things that I just cannot agree to or accept or just be like, oh, it is what it is. Like I can't.
It's
can't
tough.
do it.
It's tough once you know. There's a
Yeah.
book that's that you and your listeners should read or listen to. It's called American Holocaust. I don't know if it was written originally as a dissertation or not, but it's pretty much making the case that the extermination of the indigenous population of the Americas would qualify as a Holocaust because the population went from like 90 million down to like 10 to 15 million in definitely less than 100 years. I want to say it's like 60 years. And so American Holocaust, that one, I like, my friends read it too, and it's just, they're like, it's almost like this kind of like, you just don't realize how
No, because you know what? Because we are
lost.
taught to walk with blinders on, and we only do the highlight of what sheds the history of the United States in a positive light. You
Yes.
know, and so once you take the blinders off and you see everything else, you're like, oh my gosh, like, you know, and you can't help but to also be angry, you know, like, why would you hide this from me? Like, this isn't
For
gonna
sure.
help anybody. And, you know, just kind of like what's happening in Palestine as well, too, right now. I feel like, you know, it's not okay. It's
No,
not okay at all.
definitely. At all. At all.
At all. Earlier in the conversation, you said, you know, there's a bit of a, I don't know if like conflict was the word you used, but like something that makes you feel maybe like you're not fully entitled to some things because you are half American and half Salvadorian. Was that ever a problem for you at all? Or was there a point in your life when you were like, I don't know how I feel about this right now?
Therapy's helped. I talk about it in therapy because it's not even imposter syndrome per se, because there's no manual to be mixed. There's no
Right.
because I'm not white, and it's
Yeah.
just, but I'm also not Salvadoran. Like I'm
Yeah.
both. And so, but no, it's been an ever present thing because I don't speak Spanish. And when I have hair, like, it's not that I'm like, I just buzz my hair. Hairline kind of fucked up, but it doesn't matter. But so like when I have, like, if I let my hair grow out, I look more Hispanic than if I, keep it buzzed. But even so, people assume I speak, and I live in a suburb of DC, and this is the second highest concentration or number of Salvadorans in the United States, like LA and then DC. And so not speaking Spanish has been a thing my entire life. But writing this book and doing all this research, it's been a little bit, not illuminating, almost like it's just, there's just less pressure to know Spanish because it's just, that's a colonizer language too, right? Like if you want to get on me for not knowing Pipil, or there's also Nahuatl, like with the NAW, but it's like a Pipil Nahuatl thing, which is separate than Mexican Nahuatl. But there's like, if you want to get on me for not knowing an indigenous language, I'll take that. Like, I will be like, you know what? You're right.
You're
like,
right.
But like, I'm sorry.
Neither do you.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like, I'm sorry. I didn't get the memo on which colonizer language I should have learned.
Which one I should choose.
Yeah, I was like, I just popped out and I just got all these, like, and so this is where I don't have the same relationship with not speaking Spanish. That's one thing that's been different. But on the flip side, I'm meeting with a Maya, a traditional knowledge holder from Guatemala. It's I know her daughter. I trained her daughter years ago, and then her mother's up here. I was like, "Would you like to meet her?" And she's like, she does a bunch of things about talking about Maya like ceremonies, and this is Guatemala Maya, not Yucatec, but still kind of roughly. It's a really cool opportunity, but I also had to talk to my therapist about this because I was like, man, I don't know. Like I'm like half white. Like I don't even know if am I going to get chastised for writing this story? Because but he and a friend of mine were really helpful because the friend reminded me that everyone has a part to play in activism, right? Like you're not, just because you're not at the protest doesn't mean you're not doing anything. The history is just as important. And so, and she was at the Pride Parade recently. So it's a very much like an appreciation for activism that I don't necessarily have. I'm very much an indoor cat. So I'm like, I don't really do anything like that. But it was nice to hear that viewpoint that like, hey, just because you're not actively striving for
like in person,
correct, or changes in like the Maya condition now doesn't mean that your work is not worthy. And I was like, oh, that's actually really helpful. So there's been some tension, just like there's tension that I'm not white. It's the same. Like it's, and again, it's not a ton, but it's very real times. It's like, oh, I'm just not, like, I'm not white. So it's like, it's the same. It's like, I'm just not. And so, but it's just being neither is like the thing. If that makes sense.
That feels like a thing at sometimes.
Correct. And then, and it's also been a thing. Like I got review bombed for education, not because of the title, but because I went to a book club and they were speaking in Spanish and they asked if I knew Spanish and I said no. And they were like, okay, we'll speak in English then. I was like, perfect, fantastic. And then they were like, why don't you know Spanish? And like during the thing, like at the end, some lady was, and it was perfectly pleasant the whole time. And then at the end, some lady was like, why don't you know Spanish? And I was like, well, it's kind of a colonizer language. Like it's not an indigenous language. And they took such offense to this, and like that I woke up the next day and I had like a bunch of 1 and 2 star reviews on. I was like,
and you're like, great.
Yes.
Me and my authenticity.
I was like, I literally take the time to like spend an hour with your book club that read this book, and like, and then you're gonna do that to me, like, and I was a little salty too because I'm just like, like, why would it? And like, if you have a problem with what I said too, just say it, like, argue with me, like. If we have a problem, like, just talk about this. Don't sit here and be like, haha, thanks for coming. It's like, oh my gosh. Like, why?
It's a backstabbing move.
Yes. I was like, this is how I make my living, people. Like, so are you really for Hispanic voices? Or is it just Hispanic voices you agree with? Because, and they had some problems with, like, portrayal of women. And I was like, and then this is also another thing. I was like, I kind of made a snarky comment because I was like, I don't think that like Latin American men in the 80s were on the same page as you guys. So, and they were like, well, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, Like, I don't think you guys, like, I was like, I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying it happened. Like, that's just
Yeah.
the story. Like, should I not include, like, if I write a book about the past, should I not include slavery because it's not right? No, it just, it happened.
It
It can be
happened.
wrong, but it can still be described. And so I'm just like, it was very,
Yeah.
yeah, the authenticity gets me in trouble sometimes.
But you know what? That's a beautiful thing to be in today's world because
Oh, I don't mind.
sometimes you're like, I don't know. Sometimes people are so worried about like what are people going to think, and then obviously a lot of people's like business or work depends on these things, and they stop themselves from being honest because which I understand. I don't say that I agree with it on all parts, but I understand why. It's a lot of pressure.
For sure.
Yeah, for sure. But like, hearing you, my kids are half Mexican and they're half Micronesian. And
Oh, okay.
they're half Micronesian. And so I always tell them, you're both. Like you are both. You embrace both, right? Like, and they don't speak Spanish. They don't. They sort of understand it because sometimes it's easier for me. I just go off in Spanish and they're like, I know what that means. I know what that means.
Yeah.
But they kind of like feel like, oh, my accent. They're just, I don't know. They're weird about it. But I always tell them it doesn't make you less Mexican. It doesn't make you, and embrace
Right.
the culture. Embrace
Yeah.
it because
I should have talked to you before.
yes, you should have. You should have because I know some people disagree, but I feel like I feel like we're at a disadvantage when we pin each other against each other over
Yeah.
things like that. When we have grander things to worry about. I just feel like you not speaking Spanish it really doesn't mean anything. Like, you're still, again, like your friend and your therapist said, you're doing your activism, you're bringing awareness, you're bringing out information that people didn't know, to continue to learn and continue to push for us to know all these things.
Yeah, and so it really is just like I'm trying to raise awareness, and so it's like it just sometimes feels like I wish I was just a little bit more in the shadows. Almost, it's just like it just feels a little bit too seen. But it's also like I enjoy talking. Like I enjoy talking to you, and so it's like and I enjoy talking to people, and so it's not. There are worse things. Let's put it that way. Like it's
Yeah.
just kind of, but it's like the social media and then like the negative interactions always outweigh. Like they weigh bigger than the positive stuff, unfortunately. And that's
Yeah.
just like
And you have to, when you do put yourself out like that, you do have to sort of filter. Because you're still human, and even though a lot of the things people say, they're usually trolls and they say stupid things and there's no accuracy to them whatsoever, but your human brain's like, it still gets triggered and it still
Oh,
feels
yeah.
some kind of way. So when I had actually reached out to you, I think I first messaged under a reel, and
I don't
I
look
was
at
like,
comments at all.
I found out. I found out because
Yeah.
on the comment I said, "Oh, hey, like I have a podcast. I'd love to talk to you." And usually I'll do that because if I just directly message somebody, like they'll be like, "Who the hell is this?" So it's like my way of giving people a heads up, like it's okay. It's safe for you to open my message.
Yeah.
I just have a very valid question. And then I messaged you directly and you were like, "Oh, I don't check my messages, like my comments at all." And I can see why, because I saw.
Have you seen some of them?
I saw some of them and I was like, this is so.
I get them in my inbox too. I have to
No way.
I have to scroll past them to see things from like people. Like you, yeah. And so I'm just
That's
like,
and then I was thinking, like, I actually saw somebody who commented like, you guys realize how dumb it is that like it's the same people. It seems like it's the same
Yeah.
people.
I just love that like they're commenting, which helps boost it. And so
Right.
I'm like, yo, you guys go crazy. Sometimes
your
I'll think like
thing.
you're an idiot in there to really rile them up, and then just go to the races because it's just like, yeah.
It's so crazy to me. Like, I feel like I was just talking to somebody recently in a previous episode about it takes a lot. You have to look at people sometimes like toddlers and think in order to have some type of compassion, because other than that, like you first see it and your first impression is like, oh, you are such an idiot, like you're dumb, blah
Yeah.
blah blah, right? But we were like, you have to look at them like toddlers, and then just be like, oh, this person is ignorant because they don't know this. They're little babies, and they're like emotionally like not mature, and just get past it, because sometimes you have to do that in order to keep going.
And it'd be really, I think it'd be really tough if I was either younger. Like, I mean, like I said, I'm like 36. It's like, yo, you guys are talking shit to a grown ass man. Like, I
know.
I don't know what the fuck to tell you. It's like, okay, like, and so it's
All
like,
right.
that's one. Yeah, exactly. So it's like, if I was younger, I might care more. And if I had like more of myself it tied up in this, but I have so many other pursuits that I'm just like, okay, like, you want to be mad at me or something I wrote, bro? Like, I'm just gonna go to practice. I'll see you.
I know.
Like, I
I'll
don't
see you
care.
later.
Yeah, it's like I don't really care. I'm
Like
just
your comments not
okay.
going to stop me from doing the
No.
things I'm doing. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I know, but I do know,
It's-
and
it is
I
just the
see it for
volume
younger
is-
people.
Oh, see, but that's the point though. It's like I cannot imagine being a young person and getting this level of comments, or even like, I mean, that's a whole nother
Yeah,
podcast of like
so many
yeah.
other things.
Yeah,
So I did. I quickly was like, oh, I can see why he doesn't check his. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Now I know. Now I know. Well, this was like, I feel like we just talked like an hour and it felt like 10 minutes. And I don't want to take more of your time.
We made progress.
Yeah, we sure did. I don't want to take any more of your time, but if you're okay with it and you want to, I would love to have you on for like maybe a second part whenever you can fit me in your schedule. Because
Yeah,
this
we
was
can
a lot
email.
of fun. This was fun.
Definitely. Yeah, because I still haven't even, I have a couple more books I could talk about, and I could talk about the upcoming one if you wanted to hear about the Mexico stuff. I wouldn't talk about necessarily the story, but some of the research things are all relevant also.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. So if you're
We'll reach out. Just
if
we'll
you're
email
cool with
and we'll
that.
figure it out.
So before I let you go, you just said something to me, and I'd really love for you to show everyone.
Yeah, so while we're talking about the Maya codices, I actually have what's called the Paris Codex. I took a museum scan and then wrapped it around my leg. So that's one of my tattoo collection. Is
That's
the Paris
so
Codex.
cool. How many tattoos do you have?
Oh, too many. To
Have you
count.
lost track?
Too many to count. Like, if you see my hands, all down my arms, my back, and legs.
Tattoos are like I don't know. I love them. I think it's such a beautiful way to express like yourself, but that's a good one. I've never seen anything like that.
Yeah, no, it's there's 4 codices left: Paris, Dresden, Madrid, and one in Mexico City. And so I found one of them that I liked, like a big scene of it, and like watch, like I'm gonna go meet this Maya elder, and she's gonna be like, oh wow, that's actually like the Book of the Dead. And you just summoned a demon. So I'm like, oh, fantastic.
Well, okay, now I know why all those trolls come on my comments.
exactly. So.
Thank you so much, Marcos. Like, for anybody listening, please, I'm going to go ahead and link up where to find your books, the titles of your books. So far, like I said, I'm having a lot of fun listening to the one that I'm reading. But I do appreciate you taking the time to come on and just chat with me.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.